Hi, this is Eric, and today we'll be talking about the English attack of the Najdorf. One thing that I want to mention here is that I did make a video on bishop g5 in the Najdorf, which is actually the main line. According to most played human games, I'm just going to illustrate the overall importance of the Najdorf here, and also kind of what value it can provide to your chess study. So let's start off and take a look in the reference base at the most commonly played moves. So I think we're going to see that the most commonly played moves in human games will take us right into the Najdorf. Pretty sure bishop e3, the English attack, will be the third most common move. Let's go through here. e4, most common. c5, the most common response. Knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, and here we are. So essentially what that means is that if you study classic games, you study from chess books, or if you're just kind of following games online, you'll definitely be seeing the Najdorf quite a bit as the most commonly played opening in chess. This is where the most commonly played moves by both sides take us. So even if you haven't played it with white or have not played it with black, it's at least very good to try to understand some of the basic ideas. And what I'm going to be looking at here is, even though bishop to e3 is the third most commonly played move, not by much, by the way. I did make a previous video on bishop g5 of the Najdorf. If you look at the correspondence games, bishop e3 is overwhelmingly the main line. So apparently correspondence players consider this to be the most challenging line objectively to face. So with that being said, let's talk about bishop to e3, which is the English attack of the Najdorf. I do want to mention what the basic concept at the core of it is. So the basic way that the English attack was played was so that white would play f3, queen to d2, castle queenside, and basically just start a pawn storm on the king side. Very, very direct attack. And so that if black's king was on g8, it would be met by an immediate pawn storm that would seriously damage the opponent's ability to stay safe over there. So essentially, the basic idea behind the English attack is very straightforward, and the idea of this exact setup is employed in a bunch of different openings as well. So this is quite an important setup to be able to handle, and is very useful to know, especially if you were not that familiar with it beforehand. So the reason why it was called the English attack is because John Nunn, Jonathan Spielman, and Nigel Short, three top British players, all played it in the 80s, and specifically Nigel Short won some quite notable games before his World Championship match with Garry Kasparov in '93. So this was an important opening, and essentially this had never really been tried as a serious attacking idea, and then it suddenly started to catch on and eventually became very, very serious. And when Vishy Anand was world champion, he was also playing it. So it became a really serious weapon at the absolute highest levels. So white basically aimed for a direct pawn storm on the king side. I do want to mention one thing though. So my response to it is playing e5. I do want to mention the two sidelines, because there are two sidelines that don't try to castle queenside and attack. One of them is knight de2. There's one international master I know who plays this move. Essentially, he wants to play f4 on the next move. I have a very simple setup against that. I just play bishop to e6. If they play f4, I play knight bd7. Notice that if f5 is played, I'm not really afraid of it, because I can go bishop c4, and here I have the break of d6, d5 afterwards, getting a direct pawn break in the center. So knight to g3, rook to c8, defending my bishop on c4. Bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, queen d3, queen c7, defending my rook. Queenside castle, bishop e7. Notice how fluid and natural black's development is. Black has no problems whatsoever here. I can play b5 very soon, get some play on the queen side. Knight f1, b5, knight d2, knight c5, attacking the queen. Bishop takes c5, rook takes c5. you'll notice here that black's play is really very easy to follow. And so let's say if they play h4, a very interesting idea is I can play king to d7, king b1, rook c8, have very natural play here over here on the queen side. And for example, c2 can be a potential target. Another idea here is we could also just go queen c6 and try to prepare the d5 pawn break. So I think you can see pretty easily here that black has no problems whatsoever. So just want to go back. I'm going to try to get us directed towards the main line very quickly. So knight f3 is considered to be the positional line. I like the simple bishop to e7, bishop c4, castle, castle. So basically what I'm trying to do with black here, I go knight c6. White will often defend the bishop in advance because bishop e6 is common. Basically, one idea I like to play with black is I like to play knight to a5, queen to c7, and I like to drop the knight down into c4 in many cases. Of course, in some of these lines, I will simply take on b3, but I like this as a general plan, just because once our knight comes down to c4, attacking the bishop on e3 and the b2 pawn, it's quite difficult for white to cope with. So I just want to show a couple possible lines, queen d3, rook c8. I like the idea of knight a5 coming up. Simply play knight a5, if bishop g5, trying to control the d5 square and target d6. I can play take, take, rook c6, defending the pawn. Take, take, and a very nice feature of this is that after knight d2 I have bishop h4, and here I have a direct target on f2 to play against once I play f5. So I play f5 and the rook and bishop are bearing down against the f2 pawn. So this works very well for black. Going back to queen e2, I can play queen c7, rook f d1, rook a c8. And I'm just going to show one sample line, rook a c1. Here I like to move h6, just restricting bishop g5. Knight h4, trying to eye the g6 square because the f7 pawn is guarding e6 and g6. Knight a5, knight g6. Take, 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 take. Okay, so I can play b5 here, and one nice point is that I have ideas of playing b4. I also have ideas of queen b7 to attack the e4 pawn. So if b4, I go queen b7, I'm attacking this pawn. f3, rook f d8, simply defending d6. And a nice thing here is that after rook c6, I have a bunch of options. I can go knight d7 to b6. The knight can be very effective on the queen side, or I could even go knight h5 and g5 and try to drop the knight into the f4 square. So I have a bunch of different options here. So main point being that black has pretty easy play in this line, and I've played all these lines. Up to 2,500 FIDE level. I've played a bunch of GMs in these types of lines and haven't really had any theoretical problems. So we'll head over to the main line, knight to b3, and there's a very interesting, I guess you could say, theoretical discussion over whether we should play bishop e6 or bishop to e7. I really like bishop e7, and one point is that if queen d2, I can just play knight g4 right away. Nice point is if they castle, I can simply take on e3 and play bishop g5, winning the queen. So they're essentially forced to go g3, knight d7, and if they go for this same setup, I can simply take the bishop. I have the bishop pair now, go knight f6, controlling the d5 square, and let's say if f4, queen c7, I'm just going to simply castle and go b5. And notice how black has the bishop pair and a completely healthy position. I think black already has a slight advantage. And so essentially what I'm illustrating here is that against bishop e3 in the Najdorf, if you play e5 and play this line, you play directly with bishop to e7, they don't really have any special deviations. If they go bishop to e2 here, they're just transposing into a bishop e2 Najdorf. They're not really playing the English attack. So the great thing here is that they don't really have any good ways to deviate. So if they play h3, a really nice simple solution by Grandmaster Paravian is the move h6. And this helps restrict g4, g5 by white. And I really like this idea. So let's say if they go g4, I can just go knight bd7, a4, knight to f8. I really like this idea of just putting the knight on g6 to take advantage of the slightly weakened squares on the king side. So for example, bishop c4, knight g6, very comfortable position, queenside castle, rook c8. very comfortable position for black here. So, and notice that if they try to castle queenside with queen f3, we can just go b5, knight bd7. If they castle queenside, this is actually risky because they run straight into our pawn storm. We go b4, knight d5. We can just simply take on d5 and play a5. Now we're threatening a4. We already have a pretty serious attack on white's king over there. So the great thing about this is that we can just play very natural moves. Let's say castle, castle, b5. And this isn't very serious for white. For example, f takes e5, knight takes e5. They have an isolated e4 pawn. We have a quite solid knight on e5. We can play rook e8, and we can play bishop e6. All of our pieces kind of flow together naturally. Our piece coordination is pretty good. We have no problems with any particular piece. This is a pretty easy way to equalize. So I'm going to go back to bishop e7, f3, and note that all of these lines are going to be in the description to the video, so you can find a link to the View Chess link with all this analysis if you want to download it. So anyway, and as I've said, I've played all these lines before, so played them against international masters, against grandmasters, players of a bunch of different levels. So I'm quite sure that these lines will do fine. So anyways, if they play the main line, going queen d2, knight bd7, g4, castle, castle, okay, we're getting straight into the main line, b5, g5. The old main line here was b4, and this was a really big focus of tons of analysis, but about, I don't know, in 2010 or so, I was just wondering, well, why can't we just play knight h5, essentially blocking their attack, and in many cases allowing us to play a move like f6 or f5, point being that if they take on f6, they're opening up an attack against their f3 pawn, and they're also isolating their h pawn. So we're basically shutting down their attack by blocking it physically, and we're also getting an attack against some potentially weak pawns. What could be bad about that? So I had somebody play rook g1 against me in a tournament game, and a very simple way to play with black just be to go knight to b6, say knight d5. They usually throw the knight into d5 in this variation. Take, take, rook c8, queen a5. Okay, this is just one possible line, probably one of the more critical lines, but we can just go queen c7, threatening mate on c2, rook g2 to defend it, and just going simply rook to b8, defending the knight, queen e1, g6. So I'm playing g6 to prevent white from playing g6 once I play f6. Knight a5, rook b c8, and so if they just go king to b1, I'm just going f6. The point being that if they take on f6, what we've done is, again, we've isolated these two pawns here, and all of black's pieces look pretty good. Black even has greater central presence with two central pawns here versus one. So this is a very good answer to rook to g1, and I think rook g1 was even played by Vishy Anand, so it's been played at a pretty high level, and black's just doing totally fine there. So someone asked me about knight d5, and I have a pretty simple solution to this too. Notice, take, take, and what this does is now there's no longer a pawn on the e-file, so after I play the move f5, notice I'm threatening f4, which would then win the g5 pawn because the bishop is defending it. If they simply take, what I've done, like I've said, is I've isolated these two pawns. So if they go knight a5, trying to hop into that c6 square, I'm just going to go queen to f8. And I really like black's pieces in this variation, just with the rook and queen lined up here. Knight c6, knight to f4. So here we have a bunch of different ideas, and one of them is to play bishop to d8 and just bring the bishop out to b6 to trade away our bad bishop for the opponent's quite good bishop on e3. So one of the main things black has to usually cope with is white playing a4. But we can simply take, play rook f7, take. Okay, let's say I play bishop d8, trying to go bishop b6, queen b3, stopping our plan, but we can just go out with bishop g5. One idea now is knight c5, and we also in some cases have ideas of knight h3, so we have a bunch of different ideas here. King b1, I can play a5. I can just basically protect my king, play if h4, bishop h6, and one idea which is quite nice here is after bishop b5, I can play knight h5. And what this does is, again, I said I wanted to trade off my bad bishop for the opponent's good bishop. And what I'm doing here is now I have quite a stable f4 square. They have some definitely softened dark squares all around the board, and our knight also has access to the c5 square now. So for example here, I play knight f4, and black has quite a comfortable position. So as you can see in all these lines, positionally black's strategy is very sound, actually even very good. And it's really up to white to demonstrate something here. So usually white will play king to b1, and black can just play knight to b6, and white doesn't really have a great strategy besides just throwing the knight into d5, which was the same strategy as before. So that's overwhelmingly the main line here. And what I like to do here, I think this is quite a nice strategy. Take bishop f5, putting the bishop on the most active square. Knight a5, all right, the white knight is coming into the c6 square, which isn't a problem for us. Rook e8, knight c6, queen d7. Okay, so I play g6, and one of my ideas is to go back with bishop to f8, h4, rook a c8. This is all quite effective. I quite like the idea of sacrificing the exchange, and notice one thing that this does. If I sacrifice the exchange on c6, I'm getting a pawn for the exchange, but I'm also leaving myself with two central pawns versus 0, so I have much greater central presence, but also I'm going to have some attacking ideas on the queen side. So take, and take a look at the position here. I have pressure on c2, I have pressure on f3. If they play c3 and I go bishop f8, one thing I quite like about this final position is I have a plan, let's say, to play bishop to e6, improve this bishop, and I might be able to go d5. I also have ideas, let's say, of rook to b8 and going a5 and b4 with a direct attack on white's king. Also, I can improve my knight. I can go knight to g7 and bring my knight out to the f5 square vacated by the bishop. So, as you can see, black's strategy looks very good here. So, I think what we can conclude from all of this is that we have a very simple and straightforward solution to the English attack. So, if you play e4 with white, or if you've played any Sicilian with black, this is very good to be aware of. And even if you don't and you just want to improve your overall chess understanding, these types of positions are very important to have at least some grasp of. And as I was saying before, if you study Kasparov games, Anand games, even some of Kramnik's games, Fischer games, really any of those players, you'll notice that they had quite a few Sicilian games, and understanding this type of pawn structure, this type of position generally is very good for your overall understanding. This has been International Master Eric Kislik, and I hope you've enjoyed the video.